Hi everyone, welcome to Day One's video series for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Today we're going to be talking about sexual assault and kind of the basics and how society is affected by it and how society affects sexual assault. I do just want to say really quickly to remember to take a break if you need one. The topics we're going to be covering today and in just a lot of our video series can be really hard to hear about, especially if you've been through an experience like this. So just take steps away if you need it, know your boundaries, know what's good for you, and know that we completely understand. So just a little bit about Day One. Day One is Rhode Island Sexual Assault and Trauma Center. We work diligently every day to both prevent sexual violence and also work with survivors who have been affected by it. My name's Courtney, and my role at Day One is advocacy coordinator. And anyone who knows me knows that I absolutely love my job. So what I do as advocacy coordinator is I have the amazing job of working with our volunteers who staff our 24/7 helpline. And what that is if a victim of sexual assault, domestic violence, or a hate crime presents to a police department or a hospital, they're offered a victim advocate, and these advocates are our amazing volunteers who go through a 36-hour training and dedicate their time weekly to being on call to advocate for these survivors if one presents and is in need of a victim advocate. And I'll be doing another training later this month to talk about how you can get involved with our helpline if this is something you're passionate about and want to be more active with. Something else I do is I work with other agencies to talk about, what can we do better as a system, as a state, and just as human beings to do more regarding sexual assault and advocate for victims. And I also work directly with sexual assault survivors and domestic violence survivors to both be there for them emotionally, set them up with resources, and really be there for anything they need. So when we talk about sexual assault, we'll kind of move over into this topic now that I've, introduced myself in Day One. It really starts with this umbrella term of sexual violence. And there's so many different terms. We hear sexual violence, sexual assault, sexual harassment, all these things, and they're all similar, but they're all very unique in a certain way. So we view sexual violence as this umbrella term for really any unwanted sexual experience. So this covers things like sexual assault, sexual harassment, sex trafficking, child molestation, to unwanted pornography, sending pictures, revenge porn, things like this. And what's really important when we talk about sexual violence is this idea of rape culture. And I think this is something that a lot of people don't know the term for, but everyone kind of almost labels it their own way. And now we all understand that there is a rape culture, but we don't label it as rape culture. And what this means is rape culture is this idea that our society has perpetuated a culture that allows behaviors like rape to be okay and happen. And while I think we can all agree that most people would say rape is not okay, but it's really our actions that are saying that it is and allowing it to continue to happen within our society. And it kind of starts, if you look up rape culture, you'll see this pyramid, almost like this pyramid scheme of behaviors. When you look at it, at the very bottom of the pyramid, you see these smaller behaviors like, just sexual jokes, locker room banter is an example that's used a lot. These smaller things that I think a lot of us start to see in middle school and high school when we're kind of exposed to puberty and sex and all of these things. And it kind of starts with these smaller behaviors that when they go unchecked, become okay. And people start to believe, okay, well, if no one's telling me I can't make this rape joke or, sexualize this girl, therefore it must be okay and it must be accepted. And once these smaller behaviors begin to be okay, bigger things start to be okay. So someone who might think rape jokes are okay might go to something even bigger, like taking a picture of someone, during a sexual encounter without letting them know and then sending it to someone, because if things before were okay, then this must be okay too. And kind of the idea and what we do see is that as people normalize these smaller behaviors, these bigger behaviors start to be okay as well. And I always say, well, not everyone gets to the top of this pyramid where rape sits. It becomes a lot easier to reach the point where rape seems okay and like not such a big deal if everything below it and every smaller behavior went unchecked, not cared for, and no one said, hey, you need to stop, that's not okay. So kind of this idea of rape culture is that our society has allowed for people to sexualize women especially, but men too, and act on these smaller behaviors. And suddenly things like rape, you know, no one, I feel like we don't really see people gasp when you say someone was sexually assaulted. It's kind of just like, wow, that's terrible. People aren't as shocked as they should be when these things happen. And we see that offenders are very rarely held accountable. Um, Out of 1,000 perpetrators, about only 6 will actually spend time in jail. And as we see with cases like the Brock Turner case, where he was actually caught sexually assaulting his victim, he was sentenced to 6 months, but actually only spent 3 due to good behavior in prison. And I think, you know, we've normalized rape culture and all of these things as not such a big deal, that sexual assault is treated like no other crime in the world, really. I mean, when a victim comes forward, they're labeled very quickly as liars, as, you know, not to be believed, as, you know, having some sort of agenda to get this perpetrator in trouble. They regretted the sex and they're just using this as a way to get this person in trouble. When really, I think if we thought of another crime like somewhat like a victim of a burglary, we would never ask, you know, well, you were walking down the street at night, what were you thinking, that someone wasn't going to steal your purse? Or, you know, how much did you have to drink? Maybe you made yourself vulnerable, or were you wearing your purse really loosely? You're pretty much just asking them to take it. We would never say things like that about other crimes, so it really doesn't make sense for us to say things like this about sexual assault. But I can't remember one time I saw a case on the internet, and if you look through the comments, there's usually questions like this: what were they wearing? What did they have to drink? Why were they alone? What did they think was going to happen? So I think it's important that when talking about rape culture, we also talk about victim blaming and how our society has really fostered this idea that victims should be blamed, when we know at the end of the day that no one asked for this, no one wants to be sexually assaulted, and it's never anyone's fault if they are. Which, you know, kind of makes us really makes it important to talk about the fact that, you know, how do we overcome this rape culture if we're saying that it's integrated in our society and we've all taken part in rape culture. I think it's also important to note that growing up in this society, we have all engaged in behaviors that perpetuate rape culture, whether we want to or not, because society has deemed it okay, whether it's something as small as saying, you know, boys will be boys, or, you know, people telling girls they can't wear spaghetti straps to school because it's distracting. We've all engaged in it, and it's important that we're self-aware enough to notice when we are, and not just call other people out, but make sure we're holding ourselves accountable. So just, you know, moving on from rape culture to kind of talk about what is, you know, the legal legislation of sexual assault in Rhode Island. To kind of understand, you know, now that we've talked about this kind of abstract idea, to really narrow it down to what it actually is. And these are the laws in Rhode Island, so they might differ from your state if you're watching from somewhere outside of Rhode Island. But in Rhode Island, the age of consent is 16. And what this means is that Rhode Island law states that once someone is 16 years old, they can consent to a sexual encounter. 15 and under cannot consent. So someone who had a sexual encounter with someone 15 or younger and said that they said they were 18 or they said they were 16 or older, that's not a defense, so they would still be held liable for sexual assault or child molestation. First degree sexual assault within Rhode Island is any type of sexual penetration. So this could be penile, vaginal, digital, oral, by the means of force, fraud, coercion, or mental incapacitation. So that could be intoxication, it could be developmental disability, or that physical physical force, fraud, or coercion by means of threats, wearing someone down, or something similar. Second degree sexual assault in Rhode Island would be that sexual contact, and it would have to be proved that there was sexual gratification involved. So sexual contact like touching or grabbing, and then it would have to be proved that this person did it for sexual gratification. Third degree is this idea of statutory rape. So this is someone who is over 14 but under 16, so 15 years old, having sexual intercourse with someone over the age of 18, but there's no element of force, fraud, coercion, or mental incapacitation. And this is because this person cannot consent because they're not old enough. If the situation happened, but there were elements of force, fraud, coercion, or mental incapacitation, it would be bumped up to a first-degree sexual assault charge. And then there's child molestation laws, which are anyone under 14. First degree would again be that penetration. Second degree would be sexual contact. And for Rhode Island, these laws are for under 14 years old. So now that we kind of have an idea of what those laws look like and what sexual assault pertains to in Rhode Island, we can kind of move into why don't we believe survivors? So kind of going back to that idea of rape culture and how we engage in victim blaming. Something that we see a lot is this idea of, we have this view of offenders, and I blame the media for a lot of this, that sexual offenders are this person who's living on the outskirts of society. They're monsters. They're usually, just they look like sexual offenders. They just have that look. But this is often not the case. It's often someone who is able to fit in. We actually find through research that most people know the person who offends against them. It's very rarely a stranger. Someone who knows the victim is likely friends with them, or sometimes even family members. So often when someone comes forward and says, "This is my offender," people will look at them and say, "No, they don't look like an offender. They don't fit the mold of what we believe an offender to be, so it can't be true." Also, people who have labeled someone as good, or even as a friend, a family member, or someone in their life, people really don't want to label them as bad or as an offender, or they don't want to believe that this person who they've trusted and allowed into their life could be a sexual offender. And then I think it's also important to talk about the fact that we've made up these rules with victim blaming that, if I don't walk alone at night, I won't be raped. If I don't go out and drink too much, I won't be raped. If I, make sure I'm ready to defend myself at every second in my life, I won't be raped, but we know this isn't true. If I followed every abstract made up rule society has said women need to follow to keep themselves safe, I could still be victimized. And I think it's because part of this is that people like to think that if they follow this set of made up silly rules, they have control over what will happen to them. And while that would be nice, and if we were in a perfect world, it would be great if we could follow this set of rules and just never be a victim of sexual assault. It's unrealistic because no matter what a person does, if an offender wants to offend, they will. And it will only stop when we hold them accountable. So next, we're just going to get into consent, which I think is so important when we talk about sexual assault. And I think it's made out to be this really complex issue of, well, if I don't ask it the right way, I'm going to get in trouble, or if I don't do it, I'm going to get in trouble. But it's so simple. And it boils down to 4 basic ideas of what consent needs to be in order for it to be valid. So firstly, it has to be clear. So the person engaging in a sexual activity should be clear of what they're getting into and what they want to do. You should know this person's boundary. You should know exactly what they're agreeing to, and just know what's going on. Just because one person agrees to one thing doesn't mean they agree to every other sexual encounter or different types of sexual intercourse. So you should be clear on what this person wants to do and what they are saying yes to. It should be continuous. So when we talk about consent, we know that consent can be taken away at any time during a sexual encounter. Someone could be really clear and say, yes, I want to do this. I'm excited. Let's do it. And then halfway through, they could get uncomfortable, or maybe they're having second thoughts and they want to stop, and that's okay. So for consent to be consent, it has to be continuous, and they have to want to engage in that activity throughout the entirety of that activity. And if someone says, I want to stop, or even if someone just looks uncomfortable or unsure, you should stop and make sure they're okay. Because consent isn't, the presence of a no. It could be something as simple as just looking uncomfortable or looking unsure. So it's really important that when we talk about consent, we don't just have it as this one idea of it has to be a no. It could be a look. It could be body language that's off. It could be any inkling that this person's unsure or uncomfortable. And suddenly that consent isn't clear, and it's not, we should be checking in with that person. The third part is that it should be conscious, and it's so terrible that we have to talk about this, but we do. This person needs to be awake, alert, and not intoxicated in order to consent. So awake, they cannot be sleeping, they cannot be blacked out due to alcohol or other reasons. They have to be alert, so they have to be conscious enough and aware enough to know what they're agreeing to. And if this person has had too much to drink, they cannot consent. And if you are wondering, has this person had too much to drink? Can this person consent? They probably can't. If you have to ask yourself or ask someone else, the answer is probably no. And you should just get them to a safe place and make sure they're safe. And lastly, it needs to be free from coercion. So threatening someone, making them scared to the point where they don't want to say no due to fear, repeatedly asking them, or this idea of wearing someone down enough to the point they say yes, invalidates consent. This person should, if they're gonna give you consent, it should be yes from the get-go. It should be clear that they've wanted to do this activity, not that you've kind of convinced them to, or made them worry that if they say no, you're gonna hurt them, or they're not gonna be safe, or someone else isn't gonna be safe, or something bad is gonna happen. So at this point, now that we've kind of gone over consent, rape culture, and sexual assault in Rhode Island, I would really love to challenge each and every one of you tuning into this video to tell me, what can you do better? Feel free to write this in the comments, but what can you do better in order to advocate for survivors, or stop rape culture, or just what can you do in your life to make sure that you're also abiding by all of these ideas, whether it's asking for consent when you're with your partner, educating those around you, or just, stepping up and saying something when you hear someone engaging in rape culture, whether that's something as small as making an inappropriate joke to making someone extremely uncomfortable with their sexual advances. Any step, no matter how small, is in the right direction, and we all have a part to play in stopping sexual violence and rape culture. And as you see in our little slogan this month, that sexual violence thrives in silence and your voice has power. And we all need to realize our power and step up and use it. If anything has hit close to home during this video, or maybe you realize something that you didn't before this video, or you have questions or need to talk, we are always here at Day One for that. You can reach me at our advocacy line at 401-421-4100, extension 146. Or if it's after business hours, the weekends, or on a holiday, you can call the 24/7 helpline for victims of crime at 1-800-494-8100. Thank you so much for tuning in and just sharing your time to talk about these really important things. I'll be back talking about more things throughout the month, as will a lot of my colleagues. So please tune in. They're all so amazing, and I'm so excited to just have these conversations. So again, know that you can always reach out. You're never alone, and your voice has power. Thanks so much. Have a good rest of your day.